good work of our Secretary, Mrs. Douglas Beckford, I think will enable us to navigate through this as seamlessly as possible. We ask her to actually indicate on each page what were the decisions that we took at the last meeting, as well as what follow-up was necessary, and also to highlight the special areas of recommendations for our guidance. We want to complete our work definitely during this month of November and to provide a report to Parliament in early December with the hope that we'll be able to have some legislative adjustments, changes recommended for early consideration by Parliament and the CPC and so on in the first quarter of next year. There are elements that we would have wanted to have to impact the reporting period ending the 31st of December 2023. That might not be so, but we know that good guidance would be given to the Integrity Commission in the execution of its duties, having regard to the legislative and other adjustments that are recommended by this committee and accepted by Parliament. We can't, of course, preempt Parliament's acceptance because it is their duty, responsibility to accept or not the recommendations that we make. However, we think that the nature of the composition of the Joint Select Committee, I think, inures some confidence in the Parliament itself, in the integrity of the report that we will offer. I want to indicate further that after today's meeting, I'm going to ask Minister Chuck to convene the very next one next week, because we want to have weekly, yes, no, we will have time next week to convene, just for any wrap-up that needs to be done coming out of today, so that the following week we can have a retreat that we consider in full now the extent of the recommendations. And it is my intention to invite the commissioners to be at that retreat with us to complete the considerations in all areas, so that we are taking to Parliament a fairly strong, what I call ironclad set of recommendations for the legislative changes to the Integrity Commissions Act. The minutes are before you. Do I have a confirmation of the minutes? Member Robinson, seconded by Member Warmington. Matters arising from the minutes? Yes, right. So I think that we can move straight into the review of the Act by way of the matrix that is before us, as much of the discussions on matters arising would have necessity, require us to go to the matrix. So I'm going to then move on to item number 7, which will be the review of the Integrity Commissions Act, and the matrix is before you. Yes. We have gone a long way in the matrix. I think we did about 30. I think of the 63, we might have done about 30 of them. We're halfway in the matrix. So, in fact, by way of the orderly arrangements as we will pursue today, I want us, I asked Mrs. Douglas, our secretary, to do some detailed work on it for us. And so she's created two elements of the matrix. And on both elements, each page has a notation as to what we did, what decisions we took as we went through, so that what we can find out now is the level of follow-up, and what did we ask our technical team to do, what did we ask SG to do, what did we ask the secretary to do, and to see that those items were in fact followed. You recommend where the decision, right? So she's color coded also, yes, so that the references that you would see in blue would be the decisions, and then where she highlighted in yellow would be the pending areas. Right. So I think we could start by just flipping through, if you will, the pages that we had actually approved, just to make sure that there's nothing there that we need to tidy up on. And it will take us, hopefully, swiftly through.
What is highlighted in yellow is what remains outstanding, right? No? Okay, okay. So we need to look at the ones in yellow then. Yeah, okay.
Remember, we had gone through those in yellow in the first few pages. We had actually gone through, and we did not, right. So I don't think we need to.
Yeah, you have to take a decision and to accept or not.
Sorry. Sorry. I think we have a competing call, yes? No? Okay, go ahead.
No, when you look at what was done so far, there are some in yellow and blue,
yes,
but it might make good sense to complete where we stopped off or to continue from where we stopped off. Right, and then finish up the remainder of the matrix before we go over again. So remind me of the pages where we stopped. Chair, SG.
Because I was also going to say that we have to be clear about which matrix. We have two. There are two matrices. Right. We have to know which one we're doing. But I know that we stopped at clause 28.
28, yes.
Of the smaller matrix, which has the PS board comments on it. And I don't think we completed.
So we're getting some guidance here, SG, from our secretary in relation to the larger matrix as well, because I think we went through that too, because we were treating with both simultaneously, if you recall. 8 when the smaller and 29.
No,
section 29 of the act in the larger matrix. Yes, I remember that. That's the one, in fact, if you remember, made Member Warmington's set of recommendations were to be taken after 29. So. Okay. So I think let's start from 29, because we would have gone through. Of the small, yes.
Of the large matrix, we are at now at page 20. So the page number here. So
there's no page number. Okay, so here's the guidance. Here's the guidance from our secretary. Page 27. Page 27 now. From the big matrix. This one. We start at page 27. And from the small one, we are at page 8. Yes. Because they sometimes interlap, remember? Because remember, the small one is primarily the permanent secretary's recommendations. And there are elements of that which overlap with some of the other recommendations of the civil society groups that came to see us. So we are 27 on the large matrix and page 8 on the small matrix. All right, everybody clear on that? So, Member Chuck, remember you were the narrator to take us through, and you would read the relevant areas, and then we would discuss. Yeah, 27, no man, 27. In fact, we dealt with up to 29, section 29 on page 27. So after that now would be the establishment of the... Yes, section 30. So you go now, we start with section 30, and then we would also 30 on both pages. Yes? Okay. So hold on, we want SG to be comfortable with this. No, we would have finished 29. Yes, the last one we did was section 29. So we now go to section 30.
All right, let's go to section
right.
29. Section 29, which is on page 27 and page 8, and we'll move from there. Okay?
It says no decision was taken by the committee.
Right, all right. So the question arises, the section 29 recommendation from 1 Clifford Warmington, it is being proposed to amend section 29 1B5, requiring the executive director to submit the established practices and procedures to the commission, which shall submit same to the oversight committee. This condition is consistent with the constitutional status of the commission being a committee of parliament. When we met last time, no decision was taken. We also have a recommendation from the Permanent Secretaries Board, and the recommendation is at section 29B, regarding responsibilities of the executive director, the listing of documents to be submitted should be amended to include the corporate strategic business plan as well as the operational plan. The recommendations were not discussed. That's section 29.
Since Member Warmington, if you could, maybe Member Warmington and us, I don't remember the background to his recommendation, because it's some time ago he made it. If you could just bring us back up to speed in relation to same section 29 on your recommendation, Member Warmington.
It had to do with the functions of the executive director. Yes. propose that there be an amendment to the section. It didn't have a lot of background. Based on what I have before me, it's simply that it is proposed that there be an amendment to this subsection requiring the executive director to submit the established practices and procedures to the commission, which shall submit same to the oversight committee. This condition is consistent with the constitutional status of the commission being a committee of parliament. So it's pretty straightforward. It's there.
The thing is that this was drawn from the situation with the report that was tabled here as it related to the Prime Minister, where, in fact, at the time, the Director of Prosecutor, what it was, had ruled that there was no case to answer. Yet the report came here without including the recommendation. So the issue at stake is that if there are recommendations from that department, it should be included in the report that comes here. That's what it's all about. Instead of leaving it out, confused and giving the wrong impression overall, just include that along with the report.
Then I think the word in here needs to be different then. That's why I asked Member Warmington for context. If that is so, then the wording should be that once there is a ruling from the Director of Corruption Prosecution, that should be sent to Parliament simultaneously with the tabling of the report in relation to the same matter. However it needs to be worded, I think the drafters can, but I support it, and I believe that's what Member Warmington is intending to capture. But that's different from what is written here, actually.
But maybe SG can guide us as to whether that should be part of any legislative act or it should be more administrative. Yes.
I will respect the guidance. What we don't want it to be is left to be discretionary, which is how we got into the problem we did. So whether it's administrative or legislative, I'm open to whichever option is best, but I do believe we should be very explicit about this and not leave it open to somebody's own interpretation as to what they should do.
Quite.
May I agree totally with the views that if a report has a recommendation that the matter should be sent to the Director of Corruption Prosecution, that the report should not be sent to Parliament until the decision of the Director of Corruption Proceedings is available so that both can be tendered at the same time. To say that the matter has been referred to the Director of Corruption Proceedings without more allow for a period of speculation, which is exactly what occurred earlier this year, so that it should be made clear that if a report has been prepared by the Director of Investigations and a recommendation that the matter should be referred to the Director of Corruption Prosecution, that the matter is not tabled in Parliament until a ruling is made by the Director of Corruption Proceedings.
Okay. So,
That's 55. 55. The one we talk about 29. The secretary, the permanent secretary board mentioned the same stuff about delegating to staff members, and they asked. That's one we wrote to the commission about, and they wrote back to say that Section 30, some subsection, and Section 29 gave the director that authority to delegate, and what they said, to delegate to staff members. You have directors. That's 29.
Chair, you're recognizing me, Chair?
yes.
I want to support the recommendation. I think that it is a very fair, strong, and appropriate recommendation. And we have seen why it is necessary. But I just don't know if the area, the proposal which the member has made to amend,
Yes.
to amend 29 1B5 is where it ought to be. Because let me remind you what the section says. It points to the role of the executive director to develop and implement operational policies and procedures in relation to the functions of the commission. Yes. And whereas I think that it's an important point which ought to be adopted, I am not sure that that is.
Yeah.
55, okay, so we can.
I
see.
He did make the correction.
I see.
SG.
Thank you, Chair. So as it relates to the proposal in what I call the big matrix, because there's another proposal for 29 in the smaller matrix. Yes. I don't think section 29 or 55 is the appropriate place, but I would suggest another approach. If the committee agrees to the recommendation, leave it to the Parliamentary Council to determine the section that is more appropriate, because there's a scheme in the Act, and Parliamentary Council can make a determination as to where it is best placed, and then the proposal will come back to the committee for the committee to agree or not. Because I'm not convinced either that the privilege section is where it should also go. But I would also defer to Parliamentary Council because it's more a drafting issue and how the Act is set out.
You wanted to make a comment on it?
All right, Chairman.
All right, so remember now, Ms. Brown, Mrs. Brown, right, just the procedure. You indicate that you want to speak by pressing, yes, and then a light will, yes, a green light, and the green light tells me that you want to speak, and then I will enable you by giving you a red light. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I'm agreeing with what the SG is saying. She and I would have to look and see where would be the appropriate place in the legislation.
Excellent. So I think we could move forward then, because
29. Did you, SG, were you also dealing with the recommendation of the Permanent Secretaries Board?
No. So the first one was in the big matrix, but I just wanted clarification on what the committee is agreeing on, because there has been an issue about how a matter is to be submitted. Here I see it saying it must be submitted to the Oversight Committee. So I know there is a divergence of views about whether a report, let me just call it a report, can be sent directly to a committee of Parliament instead of being tabled first. And I think because there has been so much, because there's this divergence of opinions, I would suggest that if we are putting in a new provision, we make it clear what the procedure is. So for instance, should it be tabled and then the Parliament sends it to the committee, which is, from what I know, is the usual process. Granted, Parliament can always decide on a different process, but to me, you should have a rationale either way. But I'm just suggesting that the instructions should be clear about the procedure of how it would be submitted. So I know we have agreed that it should be done. I think the provision should go further to make it clear what the process is, because even though some of us say, yes, it's administrative, there have been divergence of views about how it's to be done, so I just think it's better you make it clear, and those instructions would need to be given to Parliamentary Council. And then after the committee discusses, I would then go to the recommendation from the PS board.
No, okay, fine. But the PS board has made a specific recommendation that coming out of the Integrity Commission, there should be an annual or biannual strategic business plan, which is what all permanent secretaries engage in almost on a quarterly basis. Well, departments.
all ministries do.
All ministries. No, Chairman.
Right, I was going to suggest though, Minister Chuck, maybe the committee could just conclude on the first issue and then we could look at what is in the PS board, because what the PS board has recommended is actually for Section 29, whereas the other one, I humbly
50.
say it's not for Section 29. But
Exactly.
since the committee has already been discussing it, I was just thinking that you could just conclude that discussion before going to the PS board one, and then I'd have some comments on that.
Right, so that when we get to the relevant section, Minister Warmington, we would have dealt with it already here. So I get the sense that there is consensus that we'll accept the recommendation in terms of the reporting. and
Mr.
that
Chairman?
there would be simultaneous submission of both reports as it relates to the Director of Investigations report, as well as the IC report as written by the Director.
Mr. Chairman, may I make an intervention?
Yes.
I just want to be clear. The recommendation that we were looking at, made by Member Warmington, is the one on page 27, correct?
Yes.
Where he says it's being proposed to amend Section 29 1B5.
Yes.
Okay, can I just make an intervention? Because when I look back at Member Warmington's addendum to his submission, he was discussing then the practices and procedures used by the commission to carry out its work. It did not contemplate the delivery of reports. So if you look at 29 1B5 or 29 itself, which talks about the functions of the executive director, at 1B, he should be responsible for, and it lists a number of things. At 5, it says developing and implementing operational policies and procedures in relation to the functions of the commission. My understanding of Member Warmington's submission on this point was that he wanted those established operational policies and procedures to be submitted to the Parliament. So the issue of reports and when reports on investigations are delivered or the rulings of the Director of Corruption Prosecutions delivered was a separate point. Yes. Right. This was so.
We agreed on that. Remember?
Yeah, but we're mixing the two conversations, huh?
No, that I think that's what SG was explaining.
Right. So that one belongs at 29.
Yes, and one belongs at 60.
The question of submitting okay.
Because 29 is a functions issue.
Not a reporting.
I agree it's two different things because at the committee went on to discuss reports.
Right.
Yes.
But even on the which is why I said I was looking back at the original proposal. And I think the committee had accepted that as well, but it also, from my perspective, 29 is a functions provision.
Not about the delivery of
Leave it as a functions provision.
I take your point, SG.
It may be that there has to be a new section created. That's where I am thinking, rather than fit it in somewhere.
Okay.
And that's why I was saying leave it to Parliamentary Council that they could now put in a provision to deal with how they submit the documents,
the policies and procedures.
the policies and procedures, as well as the reports and so
Accepted,
on. To me,
SG.
I think that could be.
Thank you for that guidance. Yes.
Right.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, then, we are agreeing this recommendation.
Yes.
Yes, I do support this recommendation.
That's the consensus that I am gleaning.
Okay.
Yes.
Very well.
Okay, so Madam Secretary, we make note of that. So we could then move on to do the substantial 29.
No, but I was, with respect, I'm so sorry. Let's say you mustn't say with respect either, because sometimes when you say with respect, it means ... But I would still humbly request that the committee go a little further to discuss how exactly this provision is going to be formulated. How are these policies, procedures, reports to be submitted? I'm just asking that because that will need to be stated and Parliamentary Council can't, they will need instructions. So if the committees agreed all of these different things are to be submitted, I would ask that the committee also go further to say how are they to be submitted.
Okay, I think also that, SG, we can look at the details by way of the instructions to the CPC after we've completed the matrix. We indicate the areas, like for example 29 here, or is it not 29, it's 60, 55, sorry, right, it's 55. It's the guidance that we need to give the CPC is in relation to 55.
Just general guidance, Chair, as to how you would want to implement the proposals that you are making. Not necessarily, because remember we say we're not touching the sections per se. We may have to incorporate new provisions, but just general guidance as to your policy and how you flesh it out.
So I think that Member Chuck had created a formulation earlier in relation to the two reports.
Well, it is even wider than that,
Yes.
though. I think my understanding is that what was being considered that the reports before they're tabled,
Yes.
whether they go straight to Parliament or to the Oversight Committee or somebody before they get back to Parliament, that I made one recommendation in terms of if it is referred to the Director of Corruption Proceedings, that the ruling should be a part of it before it comes to Parliament. But there's also the view, I think, Member Warmington had pointed that out before. If someone is being implicated in the report, just like what happened in the Contractor General's report, they're given opportunity to respond so that it becomes a part of the report before it is actually tabled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that latter issue, I think you're going to have to discuss that further because that's actually a proposal earlier, meaning in a matrix earlier, that you can discuss. So that is still pending before the committee. But what we were discussing more particularly here was how are the reports? It says that the report, the established procedures, practices are to be submitted to the Oversight Committee. The issue is, how does it get to the Oversight Committee? Is it that it is tabled first and the Parliament refers it to the committee, or is it that, well, I don't know the other way for it to get to the committee, but we would like that guidance and information so that Parliamentary Council can draft it appropriately.
Let's go back to, if we go to section 73D of the standing order, it defines how all matters from the IC gets to the Oversight Committee. And right, so it would have to be that it is tabled. Unless, of course, because, you know, I think it's probably section 13 or something like that. Let me go. I think there's a section 13 of the Act which gives them authority to deal with regulations and matters that they could develop themselves without having to refer to Parliament.
That's where I was going.
And that, I believe, is what Minister Warmington might want it to correct. To remove that power, you know.
You're correct.
Go ahead. But
So let me just find the relevant section.
Yes. Go ahead now, speak to
Thanks.
Member Warmington.
So Chairman, and therein lies the rub. Your view is a view that is held by some, but there was another view, which is why I am suggesting, rather than leave it to interpretation, which is what you're doing now, you're interpreting the process, rather than leave the process to interpretation. If the instruction is that it is tabled and the Parliament submits it, then Parliamentary Council will just very, very clearly and she has the skill, she will very, very clearly draft it accordingly.
Search here in the
I know.
meantime, so-
I would like to join with the Solicitor General in her opinion that we be explicit about this particular issue, given that it has been subject to some controversy, and that we indicate for Parliamentary Council that reports that come to the Oversight Committee must be sent to Parliament for tabling. After they are tabled, they can then be referred. I think we should be explicit with that. Which is, yes, but just to make it explicitly clear without any form for any misinterpretation. Yes.
All right. So I think the committee by itself might not be able to do that formulation because of how we're structured. However, right. So our secretary will capture the essence of what we're saying and then to send the appropriate note on it. 29, yes. Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to find the relevant section because in the act, yes. Actually, no, man. 73D is about standing orders. I was just indicating what standing orders says in relation to what Parliament does with the reports that come from the IC. Because the IC doesn't have the power to send a report to a committee of Parliament. It has to send it to the Parliament for tabling, and then it's referred to the committees of Parliament. So, but yes, 36 is probably 36, but let's research it and find. Okay, so I think what CBC?
I just want to ask one question, Chair. When you speak of the amendment to Section 29, 1B5, is it that you're saying that, or is it the policy that these policies and procedures are to now be approved by the Oversight Committee? That's why you submit. What is the purpose of submitting them to the Oversight Committee?
I believe that is the intention of Member Warmington, so he might want to explain that. I get the sense that what he wants is that for policies to also come before the Parliament. But Member Warmington, can you be a little more explicit on that?
The issue is that in establishing their, establishing the implementing operational policies and procedures in relation to function of the Commission, there are many times where they infringe on the rule of Parliament. For example, with policies, there are issues at times they wrote a lot of stuff that really are policies, and the Commission are directors. They have nothing to do with policy. So I want to make it clear that policies rest with the Parliament. Huh? That's what I was saying, because there are a lot of cases, there are issues where it's policy basically dealing with.
We have to.
Chairman, what member SG, what member Warmington is saying is not inconsistent with the proposal of what now occurs, that matters from the Commission should be tabled in the Parliament and referred to the IC. No, the IC can examine the report, and having examined the report, it can make
Yes. Yes. No. Sorry, you need to ask me. Yes.
Sorry, Chair. I'm just saying that this has nothing to do, Member Chuck, with the reporting. This has to do with the policies of the Commission and how they do their work, their day-to-day operations. Is it that? Well, that's the thing, I'm not sure.
And that is why the recommendation of the Permanent Secretaries Board is very important, because when if they have to develop strategic business plan, then that should come to the Parliament or to the Oversight Committee for examination.
Mr. Chairman, can I?
It's just a question. No, I'm just dropping in the question. Referred for what? Approval? That's what we're trying to,
No.
and that is what we're trying to understand. When it's referred, what are we expecting either Parliament or the Parliamentary Committee to do? Approve these policies, and if you include the corporate plan and strategic plan, or is it just being referred for what? We're not sure. So you see, we would need to understand because that has to be included in the draft.
Mr. Chairman, the Integrity Oversight Committee as set out in the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee as set out in the standing orders at 73D has the duty at paragraph D of assessing the effectiveness of the Integrity Commission and the appropriateness of its procedures. So if we're talking about operational policies and procedures, then the submission to Parliament and referral to the Oversight Committee, consistent with its duties under the standing orders, would mean that the Oversight Committee would be engaged in some sort of review of what is submitted, and then some interrogation of the Commission in trying to determine the effectiveness of what has been submitted and the appropriateness of it. That process in the normal course of business results either in the Integrity Commission doing some amendments or some additions, whatever it is, but it's not so much an approval, it's an assessment for the committee to opine on what has been submitted so that it can be better structured, or if it's okay, then there is a consensus that this is how the Integrity Commission is conducting its work and the methodology it is using.
But I think that would be a periodic assessment and not an ongoing one in terms of every report that is presented. So
that in my view, this kind of thing perhaps ought to be included as part of the mandatory content of the annual report.
Correct.
So that yearly the Parliament is able to
Correct.
see
Correct.
this is how the Integrity Commission intends to engage its work functions.
Correct. And I think in that context, the strategic corporate business plan and the operational plan, yes, will be tied into that report. So I think we have some consensus here, SG. I think we have some consensus here in terms of 29 and the guidance that can be given. Are we all at one here? Yes.
So what may really be required, Chair, is for us to amend the second schedule, which speaks to the content of the annual report of the Commission,
yes.
to basically incorporate. Oh, okay.
Okay. Claro. So let's go to 30.
So 30,
I'm so
SG?
sorry. So did you discuss then the recommendation from the PS board about the corporate plan and the strategic business plan? Did you take a decision on that?
I think what we have done here is to tie it into the general
Meaning,
recommendation
so you agree that those documents,
are to be presented in the annual reports which come.
it's in the smaller, what I call the smaller matrix?
That I think is the decision that we
Well,
arrived at.
but if that is a decision, I'm now going to suggest that if you're requiring those documents to be submitted, I think 29 1B5 actually should be amended to refer not only to operational policies and procedures, but you would then say corporate and
Correct.
strategic business
Correct.
plan. But I would just like to point one thing out. So commissions of parliament, we generally have a model. everything is not identical. Well, there are few that are identical, and then the more recent ones, the newer ones that were established, have some nuances, some changes. I'm just pointing out just so that it is part of your consideration, that the commissions of parliament don't usually have this, where they are required to submit corporate plans and strategic business plans. Now, granted, that is a requirement under the PBMA for public bodies, and technically, a commission of parliament is a public body because they're established by an act of parliament.
Right.
But I'm just saying...
And they are financed fully by parliament.
But I just want the committee, I just want to make sure you are fully informed that this is also going to be something a little different from the other commissions of parliament. I'm not saying you can't do it, because there are a number of differences with this commission of parliament as opposed to the others, but just that it is in your mindset when you are taking the decision that you do want this to be done, and if you do, then it would mean an actual amendment to 29(1)(b)(5). Thanks, Chair.
Yes. Guidance taken. Item 30.
Item 30, Chairman. The private sector, simple recommendation that the maximum term for appointment should be included, no more than 3 to 5 year terms. Rationale, at the end of a term, an executive director may be eligible for appointment. How often can he/she be appointed? Similar recommendation from the permanent secretaries, who said section 39, subsection 9, it is recommended that in instances where a director is terminated due to misbehavior, due process is followed, and a tribunal established to facilitate a fair hearing. And section 3010, it is recommended that a specific period for reappointment be stated. I
think we can sign off on that.
There are two. Yes. And then also the permanent secretary's board.
But I think one of the things that this asks is whether or not you do want a term beyond 7 years, or because there is a view that 7 years is a long time. Others think that it might be truncated somewhat and made a 4-year and then renewable. But to ask for a possibility for a renewal after 7 years is a lot. Yes.
I said the PSOJ, the 3 5-year terms. I wouldn't go there. I would recommend a single term of 7 years. But this is important. The pension arrangements have to be so that the individual, once they have exited that job, would be eligible for full pension. So that that person can feel free to make decisions without having to worry about gaining employment in the private sector or elsewhere when they have completed that term. But I would go for a single term, and the person be fully pensionable once they have gotten to the pensionable age.
I would vary that a bit, Chairman. To have a person who maybe after 2 or 3 years, you may not want to remain there. To go for the full 7 years just on the basis that they should get pension, I don't think is a good.
No,
one second. I would say we give a 4-year term with the opportunity for a second term, in which case they would be pensionable.
Okay, we are having contending views, no problem with that. So let's keep discussing it. Member Campbell, yes.
If I can support our technical officers, because I think I know what they're going to say. I think we have to be careful about crafting ad hoc ways of doing things that we do ordinarily in legislation, and we have a sort of practice and methodology. We have different public offices that we appoint, and there are, you know, a few different mechanisms that we use in the legislation. So we have some we appoint for 7 years, and then they're eligible for reappointment, and the reappointment is dependent on other offices acting. We have some that are appointed for 5 years, and then we look at how, and then there's another method of reappointment. I would want to ask the technical officers to give us some feedback as to the various mechanisms that we use for appointing and then in terms of the length of the term, and then reappointing, you know, some of the major public offices that we have. You know, we have the independent commissioner, we have different ones. I'd be interested in hearing. Need to look at it? Yes. Yeah, I don't think this is something simple. I mean, there are several implications in terms of we want to ensure that there is a term in office for the person to be able to act independently, to be able to act freely. But we also want to ensure that when they leave office, as Member Robinson said, that there is protections for them so that they are not hindered in doing their work while in office. And we also want to ensure that there is a healthy, what is the word I'd use? Healthy limit on any one person being able to be in office, so that the commission is constantly being filled with new blood, new thinking, and that also would limit the potential for any corruption in office. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. We always really appreciate Member Golden Campbell giving us work. I can tell you, we will do some research off the top of my head, which is not necessarily a good thing. A lot of them are usually either 7 or 5 years. And in fact, under the Contractor General Act, repealed, it was a 7-year term. However, the person could have been reappointed for periods not exceeding 5 years, which I find interesting. And in fact, this act was repealed, and instead what is now in the law are 5-year periods. And just to indicate, as it relates to pension, the current position is after you serve one full term of 5 years, you're pensionable. You're eligible for pension. One term,
but
one
it's a
full
term.
term.
That's the point.
The term is 5
defined
years.
for 5 years.
The term is 5 years,
Yes.
and once you complete a full term of 5 years, you are pensionable. That's the current construct here. And most terms, as I recall, are usually either 5 or 7.
Yes. I take the point, and then I take note of the sort of worship from Member Robinson in relation to the coincidence of timing with the political tenure, and that it may cause a discussion if the tenure of the director is somewhat aligned with that of an administration. So I am tempted to suggest that a 7-year term, but one term, and I like the suggestion of Member Robinson with regards to enabling all the necessary protection for the incumbent on completion of that 7-year period. But I would have SG do the research for us and to give us the guidance. SG?
Mr. Simmons from Legal Reform Department is making a valid point.
Okay.
So, but he doesn't want to speak up in the
Mr.
mic.
Simmons, can you ask me to allow you by touching the appropriate button? Yes, of course. Now you can speak.
Mr. Chair, I think it would work out once we go back and review it, but I was just making the point that the executive director is not a commissioner of parliament. The contractor general was, and we maintained the term of appointment under this act where the commissioners do have a 7-year appointment, but the executive director, I think, would be akin to a public officer, which is why he has, or akin to a public officer, which is why he has a 5-year term and not a 7-year term. The commissioners on the Integrity Commission Act do have a 7-year term, like the contractor general did. It's just not in this case.
No, but isn't this case a 7-year term?
For the commissioners, but not for the executive director. The section under consideration is dealing with the executive director.
By?
It's 5.
It's 5.
Right.
But
and he's not a commissioner of parliament.
Got you. Okay.
So my understanding is that what presently obtains is that the executive director holds office for 5 years, but is eligible for a further appointment. It doesn't say how long that further appointment would be. I want to understand if it would be automatically for another 5 years, or there is
renewable,
or there's some kind of discretion about the extension, firstly. And secondly, I want to understand the proposal which is presently being made for the 7 years. Does it mean that there can be no eligibility for further reappointment? I just want to be clear.
That's the sense I'm getting from Member Robinson's recommendation.
Just one term.
He's saying one term for 7 years, attached with all the protection, pensions and whatever other protection is required.
I don't know what exists in relation to the review of the performance of the executive director. I assume that the commissioners, I don't think it's stipulated anywhere. That is something that I believe we would need to look at, because while I'm all for the protection of the individual and the independence, it doesn't mean if somebody goes on a frolic of their own, either in terms of conduct or performance, that there are no ways to hold that person accountable. So I don't know if there's anything that speaks to it, but I would want to assure myself that there are appropriate measures to hold the person accountable during that 7-year period.
We would need to advise ourselves on that, because I don't have it before me, but I suspect that there has to be, yes. So we could have Ms. Douglas get that detail for us.
Chairman, it says at the moment it's 5 years, okay? But it doesn't say anything about the length of time the person has sentenced it here. So I would say we leave it at the 5 years, and then it can be renewed for another 3 years. No, it's not here. So I'm saying 5 years, and with the possibility of renewal for another 3 years. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, I hear that recommendation. I must say, the reason I'm drawn to Member Robinson's recommendation is, yes, is the coincidence. No, I take your point. I take your point. But what you want to do is to avoid. What you want to do is to avoid that possibility. But as you know how this chairman operates with you, it's all about consensus. I don't impose my own views on the committee, as you know. I'm guided. But we do have two very interesting positions. There is a discussion about 5 years with a renewal for no more than 3. I don't know. And then there is the proposal with regards to a 7-year period that's not renewable, but all the benefits of the incumbent is attached.
As the act is now, you really don't have no provision for removal of any, for the director of SDM. There's one stipulated there. The issue is the commissioner might be stuck with someone who not really performing in a way they ought to for 7 years. Right, so I'm saying at 5 years, the guy not perform, then if the commissioner is free to act on that stage and say, sit in this guy for 7 years, or this lady for 7 years.
I'm getting some guidance as to this section that relates to the appointment and removal of the director, if possible.
You're looking at it. May I ask another question of the SG? So I wanted to know whether where you have 5 year, you have these specified terms. So say, for example, serving for 5 years. Is there in any other legislation provision for the extension or where they're eligible for another reappointment? Has there been provision made to say no more than 3 years or for another 5-year term or anything like that in other pieces of legislation?
Wanted to ask, could you also, in answering Member Scott Motley's question, indicate who determines whether the individual is reappointed? All right. If this individual effectively discharges his or her responsibility, they're not going to have a lot of friends. In fact, they're going to have many enemies, right? That's the nature of this work. And there is going to be significant pressure whenever that time comes for reappointment from people who he or she may have made rulings. I know, and the pressure is going to be exerted on the commissioners. I'm telling you. I'm telling you the pressure is going to be exerted, which is why I'm wary of the reappointment issue. But again, I would want to know the methods of holding the individual accountable while in office so that if you give them that 7-year term, they can't just be sitting down there doing nothing and be allowed to stay there without being accountable.
So that the recommendations that have come through from some of the other agencies, and particularly the Permanent Secretary Board, is pretty detailed in terms of how that director should conduct himself and what recourses there should be. So I think the invitation is for us to look at that and to determine whether we legislate in relation to an amendment which gives greater control and management of the executive director during the tenure without constraining that person to the extent where he can't function effectively and efficiently. But that there cannot be a situation where the tenure is without regulation. It's not a tenable situation. So I think that's where we are, we have to decide on whether it is going to be a 7-year term, with all the controls to prevent excesses, recognizing how critical the role of the executive director is, and with reference to the point that Member Robinson made with regards to the nature of the job and that it will naturally attract, enemies and dissenters and so on. So we have to make sure that the protection is built into all of that too for the incumbent.
Chairman, Section 3210 provides for the appointment of 5 years and a another term. What the Permanent Secretaries Board is recommending that there could be a reappointment, but we should put it not exceeding 5 years. So it could be another 1 to 5 years. So, Member Robinson, at the moment, the appointment of the executive directors for 5 years. It's the commissioners who determine whether or not they provide another 5 years term. I think what the Permanent Secretaries Board is recommending, a specific period, we could put it in to say not exceeding the 5 years, or another term not exceeding 3 years, as the case may be.
Yes, I recognize the SG.
Thank you. So to go back to Senator Scott Motley's question about what we have in the legislation, generally, we've had different formulations over time. So you will recall we have had older commissions of parliament, and there are some of them that used to have a fixed period, as in the person would hold office until 70. So for instance, the children's advocate. So you have some that had that they hold office until they reach a certain age. And I think for some of them, the retirement, once you have held office, you didn't have to reach that age to get the pension, to be pensionable. And then there have been changes where now, and I'm talking about commissions of parliament, and granted, you're talking about the executive director, who is not a commission of parliament, but I just wanted to start with the overview with the commissions of parliament. And then we have morphed into a situation where you have commissions of parliament now being given terms. So for instance, this commission of parliament, the commissioners, who are the commissions of parliament, have 7-year terms. And it is going back to this act, which is a little more nuanced than other acts that establish commissions of parliament, where you have not just the commissioners, but then you have an executive director, and then you have other directors with substantial portfolios. In that scheme, it was decided that since the commission of parliament was going to have a tenure, they would also do the same for the executive director. But the executive director's term was, by policy, a policy decision, less than the term for the commission of parliament. So that is a factor when you are considering if you want to change the tenure of the executive director. I still think you would have to look back at the tenure of the commission of parliament. Now, you may decide that you want it to be the same, but the policy decision at the time was that it should be a shorter period. The other issue is that the way the legislation is crafted, it allows for a reappointment. The reappointment is not automatic, and anywhere you see this provision in law, usually it means there is a process behind it. So there should be a satisfactory assessment, let me call it that, and then a decision has to be taken whether the person is reappointed. Now, in this law, there is no cap on the reappointment. There are laws where we say someone can be reappointed for another term, or another 2 terms. Here, there is no cap,
Correct.
which suggests that the person could be reappointed for several more terms. So that's another issue you could look at. So you could look at one, wanting to change the initial term, and whether you want it to just be 1 term, or if you want the person to be able to be reappointed, and if they can be reappointed, how many more times do you want them to be able to be reappointed? The former policy was ad infinitum, so to speak, granted subject to a process. The other thing I wanted to touch on was, again, as it relates to the pension, I think if you want to vary the terms, there needs to be a rationale. And I told you what it is right now, which is the person has to serve 1 term of 5 years to be pensionable. I would just suggest whenever you're taking any decision and you're going to make any change, that there's a rationale behind it, so that going forward, other persons will understand and know why the changes are being made. After 1 5-year term. So you would have to serve a term and then be pensionable. which also, this is a construct elsewhere, but we do have different constructs, and at the end of the day, it's policy, meaning why you want to have a certain kind of term. Mrs. Seeley Brown has been looking at other jurisdictions, and you have variations from 3-year terms, 5 years, and 7 years. So at the end of the day, I think you have to decide, I guess, looking at the nature of the job, maybe also looking at stability, whether you want to vary the term and why. And as it relates to removal, there is a provision dealing with removal.
Section 28.5 to be exact.
Oh, no, for the executive director, it's 30 sub 9 for the executive director, because I know the PS board had a recommendation on that same clause, 30 subsection 9, and they were speaking of having a tribunal. With respect, you don't always have to put that in. So the tribunal is usually done for commissions of parliament. Recall that the executive director is not a commission of parliament. When the law says the Governor General may, acting on the recommendation of the commission, terminate, case law tells you that there has to be a process, and it has to be fair. And generally, the way it's done across the public sector is a tribunal is usually established in any case, but this would give you flexibility as to how that process would be done. I would suggest that it is not necessary to incorporate the big tribunal and all the process for 30 sub 9 for the executive director. He's not a commission of parliament. She, the executive director, is not a commission of parliament.
Okay.
A question, Chair. You're saying 39 is how the executive director would be removed? Does it really, though? Because 28.5 provides that the Governor General may terminate the appointment. So wouldn't 30 sub 9 be dealing with the other directors, the investigations, because I was finding it peculiar why we would have provided in 2 places different language for the executive director.
Yes. 39 seem to suggest the other directors. But I was in fact looking at 28.5, which was very clear that it is the Governor General. In fact, let me read the relevant section. The Governor General may, acting on the recommendation of the Commission, terminate the appointment of the Executive Director for the inability of the Executive Director to discharge the functions of his office, whether arising from infirmity of body or mind, dereliction of duty, misbehavior, where he becomes an undischarged bankrupt, or is convicted of an offense involving dishonesty or moral turpitude, or for any other cause. So,
yeah, I take the point that the executive director is terminated under 28.5, but it's the same process as under 30 for the other directors. Well, technically, GG acting on the recommendation. And again, you read into it a fair procedure, because if you don't do it in a fair way, then it can be challenged successfully. Because the common law requires that.
I don't have a difficulty with the process as laid out here. The fact that it is the Governor General who has that duty, responsibility, if you will, but informed by the Commission, who would do the necessary heavy lifting, if you will, to enable the Governor General to act. What perhaps is missing is the details of how they go about that, which is an operational matter. Exactly. So I think what we really want to contend within our thinking is the term, whether it is a 5-year renewable or it is a 7-year not renewable, but with all the protection that is required for the incumbent.
Can I just ask us also, I'm not recalling that any particular submission raised it, they may have, they may not have, but just as I noted now, the term in office for the executive director and the other directors is the same. So in our deliberation on the executive director, the committee may also wish to consider whether that should apply to the other directors as well, as it's set out here. Yeah.
So, SG, the guidance that you seek then is whether we have a cap on the number of times the reappointment could be. This is a discussion that I would invite members to just spend half a minute on, if you will. I'm getting the sense from the committee that there needs to be some cap on that. If you're going the 5-year route, that the renewal should not exceed 1, 2, 1, if that's where you're going. All right, so let's have a quick discussion on that and make a determination so we can guide the CPC. Any further comment?
My recommendation would be that it's for another term. I am more in favor of the 5-year term rather than the 7-year term which has been proposed because of the explanation as to why it was 5 years, the policy that drove the 5 years in the first place, to distinguish it from the term for the commissioners themselves. Right. So I come down to say 5 years with an extension of, possible extension of another 5 years.
So may I ask Member Robinson then to just give his sense on that, because it was his.
I'm still with my 1 7-year term, but I would say if you're doing 5, it could only be one option for renewal, yes, and none other. I think.
Of 3, not exceeding 3?
I would say not exceeding 3. I mean, my view on these things, which is not confined to this, I'm venturing a little outside the scope of this committee, but I would say similarly for an Auditor General, a DPP, I believe they must have fixed terms of office of somewhere between 7 and 10 years without any option for renewal. So if I'm going to alter my 1 7-year term, it would be 5 with only one option for renewal of maximum 3 years.
So that's the sense. You know, just before you come in, SG, I recall we were at this point at the last meeting, and we talked and talked and talked, and then we decided to defer for the next meeting. And so it has occupied our minds a little bit, and deservingly so. Go ahead, please.
So courtesy of my colleague, Mr. Foreman, we just looked at 2 newer commissions of parliament and the administrative heads. So under data protection, the information commissioner holds a term of 7 years and is eligible for reappointment, meaning that reappointment can be done more than once. NERO, the executive director of NERO, holds office for a period not exceeding 3 years. Yes, not exceeding, and that went to a joint select committee, and I remember some persons in here being on that joint select committee for a period not exceeding 3 years, and may be reappointed for 1 or more subsequent periods, each not exceeding 3 years. All we're trying to say is at the end of the day, yes, but at the end of the day, Parliament, the joint select committees, because all of these have gone through joint select, and Parliament have taken policy decisions based on the nature of the job and the nature of the work that they expect the person to do. Because there was discussion every time we've gone to through these processes, It's not that a number is just, okay, it is deliberated on. Let me put it that way. There is deliberation, but you have to look at the nature of the work and so on. So I think you can have a good basis for saying you want there to be a change in the tenure or not based on the vagaries of the job.
Okay, so can we move on then? The recommendation is to have the appointment of the executive director for a period of 5 years and shall be eligible for additional 3. That's what I'm saying. But a 5-year period as is now, with the proviso that an additional 3 years as a maximum. So that's the proposal. Okay, so we will formulate that appropriately for the purpose of your.
Just to be clear, tenure is a period of 5 years and eligible for reappointment for a period not exceeding three, which means if you say not exceeding 3, it could be a year. It could, and as Mrs. Seeley Brown is there chirping in, it could be 6 months. It could be a lower, it could be a lesser period. Okay.
32. Okay. So
32, there's a recommendation.
From the PS board, is it that the committee has agreed that, no, not PS board. 30, I know I saw.
Private
that
sector.
there should be a tribunal. Is it that the committee doesn't agree that there needs to be a tribunal stated in the law? Because I don't think it needs to be, but there is this recommendation. So I think you just need to take a decision. Okay.
I don't think it's needed. Yes, and the commissioners can make that, yes. So 32, the Permanent Secretaries Board makes a very interesting point here, Chairman.
Just to clarify, the recommendation for 1 5-year period and a period not exceeding 3 years applies to the executive director and the other directors.
Quite. Okay. Yes. Same principle. The 32, the Permanent Secretaries Board recommend to amend Section 32(1)(b) to read as follows: make such inquiries with the emphasis of the declarant as he considers. In other words, Chairman, at the moment, I read Section 32(1)(b), it says make such inquiries as he considers necessary. That is the Director of Information and Complaints, in order to certify or determine the accuracy of a statutory declaration. What the permanent secretaries are recommending is that we add that 3 words, make such inquiries of the declarant as he considers. It's an interesting addition, Chairman, and the reason why, if the circumstances are known now, why matters are not certified, is not that the declarant has not responded, but the declarant oftentimes don't know why they have not been certified. It may well be that having interrogated or asked for the declarant to respond, and the declarant having responded, the IC may be making other inquiries of which the declarant is not aware. So I think, you see, once they have inquired of the declarant, which they do, and there are no further inquiries of the declarant, there's no reason why they shouldn't certify. I think you're not aware, Ms. Brown. Well, let's hear it.
I'm thinking if you insert those words without more, you're limiting who he can make those inquiries of. Because it says here, make such inquiries as he considers necessary. So he may ask you as the person who is the declarant, or he may ask me who I may be your banker or your accountant, which they have that duty to do. But when you put that there without more, I think you are limiting who the Director of Information and Complaints may be able to question. And you want
But
to
that's
limit it,
that's Ms. Seela Brown.
what is your
That's the very point why the permanent secretaries, that's the very point why the permanent secretaries are making that recommendation, because I get the impression, put it no stronger than that, that they're making inquiries of the company's office, of the banks, of the National Land Agency, of the police, of the Criminal Records Office. And the point about it is that all these inquiries, I personally don't have a problem they making those inquiries. But the point at a certain point, after they have done so and they have inquired of the declarant, then they must certify. If they have no further, if the last inquiry of the declarant is 6 months, then they must certify that their declaration is in conformity with the Act. 32.
You know, it's a very interesting comment from Member Chuck in that regard, because the question may very well be that
Ms. Brown.
that a declarant could be held up indefinitely.
Exactly.
And go through all sorts of trauma and trepidations and painful emotional experiences, awaiting a certification. So I believe that there is need for some timeline to be attached to the certification of declarations. So as to enable, you know, all parties concerned to be, you know, to be fairly and justly dealt with. And this is very, very important. And I think that part of the reason that they're asking for the electronic declaration methodology to be adopted is no doubt to enable a faster and quicker certification process. But we still have to put a timeline to it, because as I said, you know, people for years, as a matter of fact, there are individuals who I know who have not had a certification of their declaration, and they have made 5 years of declaration. So I think we do need to look at that to say within 2 years, within 3 years, within 1 year, whatever. But it's a matter that I think committee, you may want to discuss now and give us some guidance on. I recognize Member Scott.
But I just don't, I agree with that. They ought to have a timeline within which they tell you whether or not you're certified. And it's really absurd that for years you don't know, and then suddenly all these inquiries are made when you're compromised in your position as to how to respond to them. But this one, I'm not sure that the section we're looking at, which is 32B, I'm not sure that is what it is addressing. Because what it says is that you make such inquiries as he considers necessary in order to certify or determine the accuracy of a statutory declaration. And if we insert of the declarant, let me use one of the examples that Minister Chuck used. So, for example, if I say I only own 2 properties, and I produce the certificate of titles for those 2 properties, what I understand is done now is that they could, for example, check with the National Land Agency, and they could find that I have 4. This is what they are allowed to do under this section. So it enables them to go beyond what the declarant has said and to verify the accuracy of the declaration. Right. So can we really meet the objectives of the legislation if we rely solely on what the declarant says, is what I'm asking?
No, but I don't have a difficulty, Senator Scott Motley.
No, Minister, I'm only trying to interpret what it is that we are reviewing.
No, but look at the power of the IC. If they ask you, you have declared 2 properties, to use your hypothetical case, and you fail to report that there were two others, then they can, after they have done their inquiries, having certified the statutory declaration, found out that you had two of them previously, then they could then say to you in a future statutory declaration, we have found out that you had these two properties, additional two properties. But if, as the chairman has said, you have persons, and to be frank with you, it may well be the permanent secretaries board who are having that difficulty, that they have been submitted for 5, 10 years. And the end result is they have not been certified. They wonder what more inquiries are being done of them.
I just think you're conflating.
Yes. No, I take your point very well, Member Scott Motley. And I think in the broader understanding, we need to go there where Member Chuck is. But for the purpose of Section 32B, it is specifically about what powers they have to go beyond the declaration as given, to verify the accuracy and veracity of the declaration itself. But to just make the point that that they would have to be doing this within a time frame that makes sense. That's really the point that is being made additionally. So I don't think that there is any issue about the powers to go beyond the declaration to verify. The issue is timelines for verification. Member Robbins.
Isn't the issue here the lack of communication from the commission to the declarant? So in the example that Member Scott Motley highlighted, what the commission should in fact say is that we are conducting our own research, or investigation may be a strong term, so at least the declarant is aware. What is happening now is no communication whatsoever, and the declarant is left in the dark about whether they are good or bad. So I think the mischief we're trying to solve is the lack of communication. And there should be communication one way or another. If you cannot certify, then you need to indicate we cannot certify and we are continuing our checks or whatever. That's what we're trying to solve.
Right. So in the context of that, a procedure might be adopted here that they have a 6-month period in which to do your review. After 6 months, they should communicate to the declarant as to what further particulars are required, if any, to enable the certification.
Chairman, when we were at the committee on Tuesday, yes, and we were dealing with the number of declarations they had to deal with, the limited amount that they could actually examine, I believe this is part of the problem.
It is.
That it takes them so long to get to actually examining the declarations that it is months after they are in a position to either say here or nay. That's really the crux of the matter.
Yeah, and I think it brings us back to the proposal that Member Malahou Fort posited in the discussion, which is something that we would perhaps have to look at. I'm expecting her to come a little later on, so perhaps she could also elucidate on that.
I don't know if I think we should put this as a question sign for the moment, and we come back to it in further discussion when we look at an overall communication problem.
But I think it needs to be. Go ahead. Go ahead. You're.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question actually, because in 32B. The Director of Information and Complaints shall make such inquiries. Can any of the technical team help me to understand where the power is set out for the Director of Investigation to make those inquiries? So although he can decide he can make inquiries as he considers necessary, but what gives the entity that he is making the inquiry of the ability to share information with him. The functions.
So let's look at, I think it's 47.3. Well, we could go through and read the entire 47. 47 there. Yes. Am I correct?
No, I don't
SG,
think it's 47.
And 33 says the functions of the Director of Investigation.
33?
But I think, yes, but I think 47 goes even further to give him carte blanche.
46 don't have a 3.
The authority is enormous, yes.
Oh. And may consult with any public body. And is that the enabling language that tells the public body that they are compelled to cooperate with him? Sorry, information and yes, this is Director of Investigation. But I would ask it of I'm trying to understand. I mean, as the framework is now, in relation to statutory declarations, the Integrity Commission can make their inquiries to verify the information you have provided. And that is necessary because it is a self-reporting system, so there has to be some verification. My question is, what gives, for example, in Senator Scott Motley's example, what gives the National Land Agency the ability to tell the Integrity Commission, yes, she does in fact own these 2 titles? I'm not seeing the power. Section 7? Okay, hold.
The definition of functions includes powers and duties, and the cooperation between other bodies and agreement and arrangements is set out in Section 7 of the Act.
Okay. I see. Thank you so very much.
We can move on here because SG?
Right. So back to 32(1)B, make such inquiries as he considers necessary. I was looking at a recent decision of the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. It's a 2021 case. Integrity Commission against Kiki Varakis as official liquidator of the Turks and Caicos Bank Limited. And it's an appeal from the Turks and Caicos Islands. And granted, the Privy Council had to look at their scheme, and there was some statutory interpretation regarding the legislative scheme in the Turks and Caicos. But an issue that came up was about the powers of that Integrity Commission to do inquiries. And I just wanted to read from the decision, paragraph 42. It said, context also requires the ordinance to be considered against the backdrop of the central importance of the rule of law in a democratic society. In my judgment, while Section 20 does not in terms limit its application to a formal inquiry, a power of the type which the Commission seeks to justify, whereby confidential financial information could be obtained from a third party in respect not only of a member of the House of Assembly, but his or her spouse and children in secret and in circumstances where no allegations of wrongdoing are made, cannot, in my judgment, be considered on any basis to be a fair process or to fall within the powers conferred by the legislature upon the commission. What the Privy Council was getting at is what may be considered by some to be a fishing expedition, but where the commissions are utilizing their powers of investigation to make inquiries of other bodies, to verify whether it's accuracy of a report of information that's submitted or otherwise. The Privy Council was of the view that it had to fall within a process, meaning there should have been an investigation, for instance. So it shouldn't just be a fishing expedition. And what I was suggesting was, because I know there are a lot of concerns about the powers that have been given to the Integrity Commission and how they have been exercised. And while it's up for debate about whether they have been acting in accordance with the provisions of the law or not, perhaps you could consider some other check or balance, which is when they are going to be making inquiries, and especially because these inquiries are going to be made in secret, and it is in relation to other persons, meaning like, say, family members and so on, and they're going to other bodies like a financial institution, and you don't even know when this can happen. Perhaps what you could do, which occurs in other jurisdictions, is that they go and they make an ex parte application before a court to get a production order. So at least there is an independent assessment of the request, and then they would use that production order to be able to approach whether the financial institution or any other public body to say, this is by order of a court, you are to produce so and so to me. But it means that there would have been this independent assessment that the information is required. Why do I say it for even 32(1)(b? Because when they're looking at either certifying a stat dec or determining the accuracy of a stat dec, recall now, and I can say from my own experience, I can't just write down and say, I have an account at a financial institution and put a figure. I actually have to produce a document from the bank to support what I have written. So it means that you're looking not just at what I have said, but you're looking at something from a bank. So if you want to know, go further, it must mean that you are doing some sort of investigation. And if that is the case, why can't you then go to an independent assessor and show that independent assessor that, look, I have these circumstances, I need to now do a further review, I need to do a little more digging, I need more information, and have that independent assessor determine whether or not they really have grounds to ask for more information. It's a suggestion that I'm putting. The court, and I'm suggesting the independent assessor would be a court, and that it would be the formula would be a production order, which we have in other laws. So like we have it in POCA, proceeds of crime, and in cyber crimes as well. And it's also in other jurisdictions for Integrity Commission, you have production orders. Even in the Turks, you can have production orders for certain things.
Chairman, I think what the SG has suggested is really very appropriate. The position we have now is that a number of MPs and public officials are complaining about the invasiveness of the IC. In other words, they are being asked questions about bank accounts that were dormant for 20 or 30 years. And the poor declarant don't even remember those. Somehow, the IC have been able to check with, say, the particular bank, and that account has been dormant, probably have 5 cents on it, but it exists.
Yes, and you have to pay $10,000 to get it.
And it has nothing on the account, but it's dormant, and then the poor declarant, happening right here among several parliamentarians, to give an account of that account when, you know, it has been dormant for 10, 20 years before. You know, Chairman, speaking personally, I remember 2 companies were formed in my office. I totally didn't even remember. It was at a time where lawyers were forming companies that they can give to their clients. And these two, 1 share each. 1 share each. And the IC was able to ask me and kept repeating. I said, no, nothing about these companies. Finally, when I checked with the company registrar, they had been, not only, nothing has ever operated on them. So I actually had to spend money to not only bring everything up to date so they can be struck off, but it was an expenditure for 2 companies that have never operated. But I have to bring them up to date in order for them to be struck off. And I'm saying that is a sort of invasiveness that is affecting, Chairman, a number of public officials. And the question arises, if you're able to check that these, in my case, these 2 companies never operated, why are you putting the declarant through all of this expense and accounts? And I think what the SG said is something we should try to formulate in a better position so that we can properly put it in the law.
I think for me, the critical issue is what is the threshold that the Integrity Commission would have to get to determine, to indicate they are now doing an investigation, right? Because I would make a distinction between seeking verification to authenticate that what you have provided is correct, and then a full-blown investigation, which would then require you to go to the third party, which in this case would be the courts. Now, I would be reluctant to, maybe tying the hands is not the right term, but to have the Integrity Commission have to go to the court each time they're seeking to verify what you have done. So for me, the question is, what is the threshold that then triggers an investigation? And my assumption, they are not here, but my assumption is the reason they may not tell declarants is that they don't want people to potentially do anything which may interfere with their own process, which is why they say nothing to you. But we must determine that threshold, because you wouldn't want a case where each time you need to verify something, you need to seek a court order to do so, if it is simply a verification of what somebody has put in a declaration.
I think there's one further aspect, and I think there is consensus here that the SG's summation a while ago is apropos and should be incorporated in the decisions that we finally make in this regard. But I think also there has to be a statutory period that, you know, the commission can operate within. The declarant, having made their declaration in relation to, let's say, annual 12-month period, how far in time do you go to investigate, to enable the veracity of the period of declaration that the declarant has indicated? In other words, do you go 10 years, 15 years, 30 years? Or do you go to the beginning of time? So what we're saying is, I believe there's a provision that the Commission's life began in 2017, and that its responsibilities to deal with declarations in relation to 2017 to now. And so we would want some further clarity on that in terms of whether or not it is within their purview to go beyond 2017, to go to 2003, 2001, in the 2019, as the case might be. So that's a matter that we will consider at a later point, yes.
On that particular point, the only question I would, while we contemplate that, is if in the process of authenticating a declaration, they come across information which points to omissions or errors in a previous declaration, then what do they do?
Which wouldn't be later than 2017.
Which may be before.
Well, they wouldn't have purview then because there was a different commission that had responsibility then, and that commission would have signed off on your declaration and said, yes, it was okay.
Well,
yeah.
No, all right.
Can I just say, they have been asking about information from even in the 80s.
Yes, which is,
They have been asking for information from in the 80s.
yeah, which is the line.
We have just been looking again at the Act. So when you think about determining accuracy of information submitted, so in the case where I wrote down my bank information, but then I also showed something from the bank. Remember, the bank has to now certify, or I have to provide certification from the bank of what I wrote. Is it that then they are questioning, when they go back to the bank, is it that they're questioning the letter that the bank gave me? And so in that situation, and so my thing is, in that situation, doesn't that mean there is an investigation going on? Because on the face of it, that is not just looking at something I just submitted and that there is no certification of what I submitted. There is certification of what I submitted. I had to produce something from the bank certifying what I have written. So if you are now saying it is to examine the accuracy of what I submitted, I would have thought you meant something that was not certified. But if it's already certified, then where are we? It must mean we're at an investigation and not just what 32(1)(b) says, which is making inquiries to certify, and I remember, in order to certify, and I have provided certification, or determine the accuracy, and again, I would have submitted something from the financial institution to determine the accuracy of what I wrote, which is why I was saying that, no, you must be elevating it to another level.
Well, I would just say it is not, I would ask members to it is not beyond the capacity of financial institutions to collude with individuals and provide information which may not be correct. I mean, I'm just saying that possibility exists. I'm just saying that possibility exists. So we mustn't pretend as if it.
No, I take the point that it does exist, but I don't think we should operate on the premise that what is before us is not accurate. We need to find reasons to trigger that. In other words, it's not just to say on the surface of it, I get a certification from the bank, I don't agree. No, it has to be something that triggered it. And then that is what I think the SG was pointing to. Where is that something? How did we derive it? And what authority now we have to pursue it? SG.
Just a quick comment. So in a sense, I'm in agreement with Member Robinson. There would have to be a threshold. But my argument is, in the situation I have put forward, the threshold is already met. If you are suspecting that what is submitted from the financial institution is fraud, that must mean it's an investigation.
Yes.
And that's why I'm saying, especially for those aspects of the stat deck, in fact, I can't think of any aspect of the stat deck except where, for instance, if you are putting forward information about your, maybe the age of your child, you don't, I have done that and I did not show a birth certificate. But certainly every other material factor, I actually have to provide independent certification of what is on the statutory declaration. And so my point is, if I have put something down and I have also provided certification of what I have put down, for the Integrity Commission to now decide to go beyond that, from my perspective, it's triggering some sort of inquiry / investigation.
Listening to SG, is this of sufficient importance that we should probably inquire of the Integrity Commission? They're thinking with their own approach. Because I'm listening to what she says, I share her view. But I don't think that they would embark upon this process if they did not find that there was sufficient reason to do so. And in coming to a decision, I like to get all the information to advise myself.
Except I think what is being sought here is some basis on which we could properly say these actions could be triggered. In other words, you've asked for a declaration. You've asked for substantiated documents for every item of entry. They are provided. Now, in the instance where they are not provided, that's a different issue. But if they are provided in every instance, there must be then a threshold which would inform a further investigation. And I think that is perhaps what the SG is indicating here. So, to your point, and we are always willing, as you know, to get further and better particulars to guide our process. We always do that. So the suggestion, recall I said at the beginning that we were going to invite the commissioners? Yes. Okay, very well.
Mr. Chairman, I want to support that request as well, because while I appreciate your comments, I think we need to understand better what does certification mean,
yes.
because it is not defined by the Act what is certification to my knowledge. And so the word is used in the provisions, but it has no definition. So I think we need to understand from the Integrity Commission, based on their processes and procedures, what certification means. And I think out of that engagement, we would have a better understanding of what the threshold is that would trigger an investigation to be able to deliberate with full information on this.
We're at one on that. I think there's consensus here. And as I indicated earlier, we do have that intention before we wrap up these considerations. All right, so can we move then to 33?
One proposal from the private sector organization of Jamaica. The following are being recommended for section 33(1)A and 33(1)C. Remove, quote, and subject to any general or specific direction of the Commission from 33(1)A. Remove, quote, subject to the general direction of the Commission from section 33, subsection 1C, and consider including a subsection to indicate, for the avoidance of doubt, that the Director of Investigation is not subject to the direction or any control of any person or body in relation to the conduct of his investigative functions under this Act. Rationale: the Director of Investigation is subject to the direction of the Commission in pursuing investigations. The investigation of allegations of acts of corruption or non-compliance with the Act is just as fundamental as the objective of the Commission as prosecution of substantiated allegations. Therefore, why not have a provision similar to 34(3) to ensure that the Director of Investigation is not subject to the direction or control of any person or body in relation to the conduct of his investigative functions under this Act? My preliminary position, Chairman, I don't see the need for it.
Okay, so 34 there is a nuance, and there's a reason why 34 had that provision. 34 is dealing with the Director of Corruption Prosecution.
Right.
You had to ensure, because of the powers of the constitutional remit of the DPP under section, is it 94
33.
of the Constitution,
Page-
there had to be
27,
this
28,
provision in
Private sector.
34 dealing with the Director of Corruption Prosecution. And you'll recall that there are, I think there is even an earlier provision dealing, no, it's in the same 34, dealing with the interplay with the DPP.
No, she just.
34. I'm saying the reason, I would say there is a distinction and a difference between how you deal with the Director of Investigation under 33 and the Director of Corruption Prosecutions in 34. I noticed that the recommendation is you include something similar to what's in 34 in 33. And I'm saying I'm not sure the rationale is the same. The reason certain things were put in 34 was to ensure that you protected the constitutional remit of the DPP, but also gave certain powers to the Director of Corruption Prosecution. And just noticing and trying to recognize the interplay between the DPP and Director of Corruption Prosecution. I'm not sure that you would need this kind of power for the Director of Investigation.
And that's the point, Chairman.
And I think that the Director of Investigation is subject to the direction of the
And
Commission.
guidance of the commissioners.
Commission.
So we don't support that provision. There's one other proposal from Jamaicans for Justice, Section 33, recommendation details the power of the investigative officer. It is therefore being proposed to specifically give the investigative officer the power of arrest. I won't want to read the rest of it, Chairman. The answer no. They want to give the investigative officer the power of arrest if the person is to be charged. The powers of arrest. No, the answer is no, Chairman. So we go to Section 34. Read it? No, you want me to read it? Well, I read it, Chairman, for fulsome. The point Jamaicans of Justice, the rationale is JFJ's positioning that while Section 7 speaks to cooperation with competent authority, which includes the JCF, the investigative officer's powers should be strengthened similar to the provisions of the Turks and Caicos Act, Section 28, to extend to power to arrest of a constable. No, Chairman.
Not supported, Chairman. Let the record so indicate.
Sections 34. No, we just did 33. Right, so we're going to 34, Chairman, and there's quite a lot of extensive discussion point on 34, including about 4 recommendations. So that will, yes. We said we're not supporting it. Yes, we did. We read it.
The one that said in section 33(1)(a), the last word complaint should be capitalized so that the last line reads. You did that one?
Yeah, we're not supporting it. Yes, I read it. Huh? Yes, I read it. Yes, I saw it, but to the best of my knowledge, okay. And complaints in section 33, 1B and 1, it is recommended to insert variation between the words implementation and or termination in both subsections. Rational, no provisions for monitoring and or investigating variation of a contract. No, Chairman, no need for that. You're going to investigate the contract, you investigate it, including the variation. You don't need to split it. No need to modify.
Yes.
The functions of the Director of Corruption Proceedings, Chairman, quite a bit of it, but from Jamaicans for Justice, for section 34(5), there is a proposed amendment for subsection where difference of opinion exists between the Director of Corruption Prosecution and Director of Public Prosecution in relation to a matter referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions Pursuant to subsection 4, the opinion of the Director of Corruption Prosecution shall prevail. That don't make sense.
No. I think we will be taking away the power.
Right. This is
of the
subject to
DPP.
the
We
acceptance
can't do
of
that. So that's-
JFJ's recommendation to embed the Integrity Commission as a body of the Commission, similar to the Director of Public Prosecution and the Auditor General, rather than remaining a body of statute. I don't think we need to read the rationale, Chairman. Now, Best the Morning Connection wrote, Section 34(1)A renders the prosecutorial powers of the Commission subordinate to the DPP. We recommend that the Corruption Agency be given its own original powers and that a raft of remedies uniquely tailored to affect offenders in the pocket, reputation, and career be developed. A system of monetary fines and demerit points can be used to disqualify offenders from further service. Remove or suspend certain privileges or generally affect their eligibility to serve under the Representation of the People's Act. Criminal prosecution by the DPP should be one of the several options to be pursued. That is best. The answer. Still again, Chairman, we have a constitutional, unless we change Section 94, none of these recommendations can be accommodated. Private sector, Section 34(5), the necessary deference can be given to the DPP, commensurate with the provisions of the Constitution, without giving the DPP more power than she already has by virtue of the constitutional provisions. Perhaps amending the provision to provide that, quote, upon receipt of an opinion from the DPP which differs from that of the Director of Corruption and Prosecution, the Director of Corruption and Prosecution may seek a third opinion from a reputable attorney with experience. No. Answer no, Chairman. And from one Clifford Warmington, recommendation in Section 34, it has been proposed to return the role to the Director of Public Prosecution. It is being proposed that the provisions of the Act which vest prosecutorial powers in the Commission should be deleted, as these powers are constitutionally vested in the DPP. Section 34 creates the position of Director of Corruption Prosecution, whose duty and function are the prosecution of crimes committed under the Act, including the crime of act of corruption. However, the section expressly states that the Director of Corruption Prosecution is subject to Section 94 of the Constitution. Section 94 vests, and we know what Section 94 says. Furthermore, subsection 4 expressly states that the DPP is empowered to authorize any person or authority to exercise the prosecutorial powers vested in the office of the DPP. Based on the foregoing, Section 34 of the Act is either unconstitutional without an amendment to Section 94 or OTOs. Alternatively, no prosecution can be lawfully carried out by the Director of Corruption Prosecution without the permission of the DPP first had and received, oftentimes referred to as a fiat. Another basis which supports this amendment derives from the fact that the Commission is a committee of Parliament. This means that the Commission is subject to standing orders of the rules governing the conduct of parliamentary business. It would have the effect of Parliament setting up its own investigating arm, which proceeds to criminally prosecute a special category of persons. This is inconsistent with our constitutional arrangements, where crimes are investigated by one arm of the state, the police, and prosecuted by another, the DPP. The Parliament should establish a committee of Parliament which has powers to carry out criminal prosecution is inconsistent with the democratic form of constitutional government. Chairman, this
is a very huge piece.
The position, Chairman, is that, as I understand it, when this came about, as with other recommendations at the time, this is around 2013 to 2015, the DPP was undermanned, and it was felt that commissions of parliament such as the IC, Indicom is a good example, where it was said they should be given their own prosecutorial department. Still, they would be subject to Section 94. Minister Warmington's position here is that you don't need this section, and indeed, Chairman, to the best of my knowledge, over the last few years, the person who is acting as the Director of Corruption Prosecution is on secondment from the DPP's office. If that arrangement could be formalized, it would solve the problems of Minister Warmington, in that you could say that the Director of Corruption Prosecutions should be a person seconded from the DPP's office, either remaining at the DPP's office or sitting at the IC special area. Because, to be fair, on all the reports that are provided by the IC, where the investigator may want to recommend or ask the Director of Corruption Prosecution to look to see if the person should be charged, they do need a person or persons fully devoted to examining all these reports. So yes, there should be a Director of Corruption Prosecution or a department, whether it exists as a department at the IC, or it is two persons identified by the DPP, and they sit in the DPP's office solely responsible for matters from the IC, is a matter that can be debated. But I agree with Minister Warmington that the persons should be accountable to the DPP, which effectively is what the section implies. But we should make it formalized, and Ms. Brown, what we would like to do is in this particular section, that the Director of Corruption Prosecutions, we need a formula to say that they should be seconded from the office of the DPP or approved. Well, seconded from the office of the DPP. Because, you see, the truth of the matter is that they're subject to the office of the DPP anyway.
Chairman, I have to strongly disagree with Member Chuck. And I think Member Chuck is conflating two issues. The nature of the appointment of the Director of Corruption Prosecution, in my view, should have nothing to do with the office of the DPP. It just so happens that the person who is the incumbent is seconded from that office. But from my perspective, that recruitment should be independent of anything to do with the DPP. What currently exists is that the DPP has the final say in whether any criminal prosecution goes ahead. So even if the DCP makes a decision, it can be overturned by the DPP, right? I don't believe that you need to move the Director of Corruption Prosecution. That the rationale for putting that individual there, the way that we have a poor track record in the country of successfully prosecuting persons who are involved in fraud, financial crimes, etc. And there was a view at the time that you needed somebody devoted to that particular exercise. Having put that person in there, they still will have to, at the end of the day, be subject to the DPP's final ruling. I don't see any issue with that. I don't see why we would want to move the DCP. And I don't think there should be anything in there which speaks to who the Director of Corruption Prosecution is. I would definitely not agree that the person must come from the office of the DPP at all. In fact, that would make the person even more subject, personally, to the DPP. So from where I stand, I would not support the removal of the Director of Corruption Prosecution, and I believe the safeguards that that are there to guide against someone who may be overzealous exists because the DPP can overrule if the DCP makes a recommendation.
Yes.
I'm on your blind spot, it
Yes.
seems.
And then,
You know, I think what I want to say is, you know, when we are looking at reviewing an act, our duty should be very targeted. Our focus should be targeted at what in the act is either not working well, needs to be improved to be able to facilitate on-the-ground work better, and are looking at the interests or the rights of the various stakeholders that that act applies to. So I too am not supportive of removal of the DCP. What I would say though is, what's the mischief? As far as I am aware, the DCP has been operating in the role, and I don't know that we have any issues with how the Director of Corruption Prosecution's role has been performed. I would be interested to know, though, I'd be interested to know what that history has been, the prosecuting, what the prosecuting arm has been doing. And in particular, when a matter is being prosecuted by the Integrity Commission, how is that actively engaged? Is it that the DCP herself or himself is the attorney marshalling evidence in the court, or is it that there's a private prosecutor who is hired by the Integrity Commission? I would want some learning on that score.
I want to support both of my colleagues in their observations. And I just want to remind us that the same section that we're looking at does make provision, firstly, that the DCP has to conduct everything in accordance with the prosecutorial code of practice that may be implemented by the DPP. But it goes further, because it also provides that if there's a difference of opinion between the DCP and the Director of Public Prosecutions in relation to a matter, then the opinion of the Director of Public Prosecutions shall prevail. So I think that there are sufficient checks and balances in this legislation which should assure everyone that the DCP is not on a frolic of its own.
All right, and the issue of I think before you leave, Member Warmington. Before, I just wanted some guidance, because in the recommendation and the preamble to the recommendation, the member indicated some constitutional issues and questioned whether the provision as is undermines any element of the Constitution. So I would love a response from SG in that regard, just to clear the air, so we can then move. Yes, you can.
Constitutional issues are determined by the court. And if there is a challenge to any provision in any legislation, I think that it is not for Parliament to determine, but for the court to rule on.
Go ahead.
I mentioned Section 94. That gives complete prosecutorial power to the DPP. We did not amend that section when this was created. That's what I'm saying. Just as the Privy Council removed that we gave to Intercom, it's the same thing right here. Indicom, we call them. When we grant them that authority, the Privy Council threw it out. So in this case, is my colleague here suggesting that we wait and someone challenges in Supreme Court? No, I'm saying we did not amend Section 94 to create this Section 34. And this is subject to Section 94? No, we did not amend Section 94 when we created Section 34. That's what I'm saying. There's nothing here said that we amend Section 94 and prosecutorial authority is given total DPP. Right. So unless you amend that, then you can't create another one at this 34. That's what I'm saying.
It's a lacuna in the law.
It was never amended.
I'm going through the responses of members, but I'm going to rely on the guidance of the SG on this matter. Yes, go ahead.
We're confusing two things. We're confusing the power to prosecute with the authority to stop a prosecution. The DPP has ultimate authority to stop a prosecution and can do so, and her decision is final and binding on everybody. But the power to prosecute, the authority to prosecute, exists across many different public entities. I believe, doesn't NEPA have it on the environmental laws? NSWM, yes. So our constitution doesn't prevent another prosecuting authority, but it says that the DPP can come into any prosecution and decide that the prosecution must stop. That is what we're confusing. So 34 would not be unconstitutional in setting out the powers of a director of corruption prosecution, but it certainly could not say at 34, what was the section Senator Scott Motley wrote? It could not say anything else but what is said at 34.115, because the DCP must be subject to the DPP.
So I'll just read from the Constitution. Right. This is 94.5. The powers conferred upon the DPP by paragraphs B and C of subsection 3 shall be vested in him to the exclusion of any other person or authority. Those powers are the powers to take over and continue any criminal proceedings that may have been instituted by any other person or authority. And C is to discontinue at any stage before judgment is delivered any such criminal proceedings instituted. So the Constitution does recognize that even though the DPP can institute and undertake criminal proceedings, that other persons can also institute and undertake criminal proceedings. But however, the Constitution says that only the DPP can take over and continue and discontinue proceedings. So anybody can actually institute, and the DPP can also issue fiats, but the DPP has the sole authority to take over any prosecution that was instituted, and the DPP has the sole power to stop them or continue them, because we have had situations with another entity that has started a prosecution, and the DPP then joins and takes over those proceedings. So they continue those proceedings. They don't just stop them, because there are times when the DPP will exercise the power to stop. There are times when they take over and continue. So they don't always just discontinue. But those powers are exclusively for the DPP. So reinforcing what Senator Golden Campbell said.
Excellent. Right. So now I think we have a clear understanding of that. We can move to 35. Member Golden, can I ask you to be the narrator? Minister Chuck has to go for it. We're at 35. And then after that, after you've done a few, I'll ask Member Scott Motley to continue narrations. It has to be. You want to take us a break? You want us to take a half-hour break, and then we come back and... No, No, it's a break. And we come back. Yes, a break. I think there's lunch downstairs, isn't it? There's no lunch? Yes, all right, team. Members, I think we don't want to lose the quorum, because Member Warmington has to leave because he had a previous 1 o'clock. Member Chuck is just off for a couple of minutes, a health break. He'll be back. So can we take a 1 hour break? Half an hour. Half an hour break? A health break for half an hour. Yeah, I smelling food. There's lunch? Yeah, she says there's lunch. She said there's lunch. There's lunch downstairs. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Have lunch downstairs. We'll take care of the bill. Okay? Make sure that we cover it. But even if it's soup, and I can fix some quick chicken, but the soup there is great, so we eat soup. Oh, okay. Can we take a half-hour break? I think there's some lunch provision downstairs. Might not be exactly what all of us want, but there's some provision. I gather today is soup day. Yes.
Tune in Sunday, November 5 at 9 p.m. and experience the passion of the past, present, and future in words and song. Watch the 13th staging of the Jamaica Poetry Festival right here on PBCJ, the People's Station. Watch the 2023 CCRP Living Legacy Awards. See and hear about outstanding Jamaicans in the field of medicine, education, culture, philanthropy, and more.
I said to myself, no, Miss Lil, you can't do that in the talk of the town, in front of all these people of renown. Nor can you do some brookings or dinky mini ben or kumina or revival spin around.
You're having a wonderful time?
Watch the CCRP Living Legacy Awards and be entertained, inspired, and edified. The 2023 CCRP Living Legacy Awards, Monday at 8 p.m. only on PBCJ, the People's Station. It's Thursday, November 2. In the headlines, flash flood watch remains in effect. Jamaicans could pay less for agricultural food this Christmas. In business news, gas and diesel prices are down. Regionally, Guyana's government deploying focused strategies to empower women. Internationally, 28 countries signed up to the Bletchley Declaration during UK AI Safety Summit. And in sports, Gilbert's stint as Reggae Girls head coach extended. This is the news on PBC Jamaica. I'm Simone Absalom Gale. November 2 is International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. A Council for European campaign for the safety of journalists was launched on October 5 in Riga. It aims to advocate for the implementation of robust legal frameworks and promoting international collaboration